All right, folks, welcome back. We recently learned the news. You know how you chant at games, we're number one, we're number one. Well, now we're number two. I'm talking about the United States when it comes to being the world's largest economy and economic power. That title now goes to China. Joining us now is Gordon Chang, LIGNET Contributor, author of The Coming Collapse of China, and Forbes.com contributor as well. Gordon, always good to talk to you. How concerned should we be? I mean, this is the first time ever, almost, right?
Well, I don't think we should be concerned at all because the International Monetary Fund, which is the origin of this report that China is the world's largest economy, was using a method called purchasing power parity, which is really disputed among analysts because it is very difficult to calculate prices. The whole concept behind PPP is that a Chevy Suburban made in China and a Chevy Suburban made in Michigan should be valued the same for purposes of calculating gross domestic product. The problem is you have no prices in which you can really compare. And that's why people use the nominal exchange rate method, which shows that the US economy is about 70% larger than China's. But in any event, the Chinese economy, even if it were larger than ours, and it's not, but the Chinese economy is heading for a debt crisis, and it's much smaller than people think.
All right, well, that's interesting. So all this is a bunch of hullabaloo about nothing?
Well, obviously China is growing, but, people have been using this PPP method to say that China is larger than the United States since 2010. So there's a lot of disagreement about all of this. I mean, the important point here is that the United States has an economy which is recovering, which is strong for many reasons, and the Chinese economy is slowing very fast, and it's heading to a debt crisis of historic proportions. So you got to think of Japan in the late 1980s when it headed to the crash. I mean, that's basically what's going to happen to China if China is lucky. China has some real problems right now. It has no way to solve them. And it's just waiting, I think. The leaders are waiting for the thing to fall apart.
All right, now let's get a little sexier, as they say, and talk about this new Cold War, as it's being called, being waged not here on Earth, but being waged in space, and China's the recent developments involving China there.
Yeah, I think we should be more concerned about this because a hypersonic glide weapon, which could deliver a nuclear weapon, would be very difficult to defend against. And from all accounts, China is a little bit ahead of where we are in terms of developing these types of delivery vehicles. So, China is rapidly building up its nuclear forces. The United States is drawing down. And I think that right now this is a mistake because this whole concept of deterrence is eroding. And nothing good ever happens when deterrence erodes.
Get inside, let us inside the minds of the Chinese government, if not certainly not the Chinese people, but the Chinese government. I've heard it said over and over, I don't forget who the quote is from, that, if we lose 10 million people, it's okay as long as we kill 20 million of theirs or some such thing. Is their mindset that if they become militarily superior, if they develop this threat where they could strike us with a nuclear weapon and not face retaliation, would they do it?
That's a really interesting question. The quote, by the way, comes from Mao Zedong, who said, it doesn't matter whether we lose 300 million people, we've got so many more. And he said this in the 1950s, I believe, when China was a lot smaller than it is today, when 300 million was obviously a much bigger proportion of China. Chinese leaders, I think that they actually contemplate sometimes the use of nuclear weapons. We saw this last October when state media in all its main platforms ran identical stories about how Chinese submarines could launch ballistic missiles with nuclear weapons and incinerate Americans in 13 cities that it designated and also kill millions in Chicago by radiation. So clearly the Chinese leaders talk about this. They have, I think, a very different doctrine when it comes to these weapons than we do. We've got to be very concerned because I think that they believe that they may be able to get away with it.
And this comes as Hillary Clinton reportedly said, we need to be sympathetic to our enemies. So this doesn't bode well for the future if she does become president. We need a president who will think like you and understand that this is a threat and not to be taken lightly. We haven't even touched on, Gordon, the cyber threat where they could shut down, and this has been acknowledged by Department of Homeland Security. They could shut down our electric grid and our power grids and our infrastructure. That'll be for another time. So China is a big big threat to our very existence and our well-being. Gordon, always great to talk to you, sir. Thank you very much.
And thank you.
All right, my pleasure. Gordon Chang, ladies and gentlemen. We don't take it seriously. We're sleepwalking through it. We'll be back with the co-host of Close Encounters, Lisa Jandovitz, and we'll talk about Ray Rice. But first, the moment for prohibition, or the movement for prohibition, started out of concern over the adverse effects of alcohol. The movement did not prove to be very effective or popular and came to an end in 1933. Let's take a look back now at the end of the national prohibition of alcohol in America.
It was intended to take the roar out of America's roaring 20s, but instead its passage divided the nation and began an era of bootleggers, speakeasies, and rum-running gangsters. When ratified in 1919, the 18th Amendment to the Constitution outlawed the manufacturing, transportation, and sale of intoxicating liquors. Consequently, organized crime was quick to step up and quench the thirst of an eager nation. The Volstead Act gave federal agencies the legal authority to enforce prohibition, but with an average of only 30 enforcement agents per state, the illegal liquor flowed freely. By 1925, in New York City alone, authorities estimated over 100,000 illegal bars were thriving, with customers consisting of friends, neighbors, and lawmakers alike. Still, some law enforcement became famous fighting the booze trade. One was Eliot Ness. As a top agent of the Bureau of Prohibition, Ness led a team of men known as the Untouchables. Tough and incorruptible, they brought down Chicago bootlegger and mobster Al Capone. But bowing to public pressure, in his 1932 presidential campaign, Franklin Roosevelt endorsed the repeal of prohibition. It was later reported, with the Depression in full swing and national morale at rock bottom, then President Roosevelt remarked, "I think we could all do with a beer." With the passage of the 21st Amendment on December 5, 1933, prohibition was officially repealed, making the 18th Amendment the only amendment in the U.S. Constitution repealed by the passage of another. Still, even with the repeal of prohibition, many states chose to remain dry, the longest running of which was Mississippi, who didn't repeal their self-imposed prohibition until 1966. For Newsmax TV, I'm Bill Curtis, and this is an American Moment.